So we are here with Dana Wills, who has built a career spanning decades, working some of the on the most significant industrial and tech facilities in the country. So Dana, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Jacob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad you're here. So, you've had an incredible career in construction and pre-construction leadership. I am curious, just to start, can you tell our listeners what Sprint Mechanical does and what your role involves as director of pre-construction?
Well, interesting you say that because I just separated from Sprint Mechanical just recently. But I will talk about what my role was. I was director of pre-construction. Mainly, I was focused on business development, and I had a lot of contacts. Sprint was a startup looking to break into from oil and gas into semiconductors. Most of their people came out of the oil and gas industry, but then they had made a switch. A couple of guys left and took about 22 people with them from their former company and started Sprint Mechanical. So it was an exciting few months for me. It was exciting to be brought on board. I was fairly successful in what I did for them. I put $100 million in paper for them and left with about 300 million in leads for them. So it was a productive, 3-4 months. We just didn't quite come to, agreement on some management philosophies and a few other things. But no, it was a mutual, amicable agreement to separate. So I'm still friends with the CEO and the COO. And I'm sure I'll be doing business, and we'll have connections in the future. So, but mainly what my job is in pre-construction is just making sure that the bids are being set up right, making sure that we're capturing the scope, make sure that we're crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's, sort of the thing. Because on the front side is where you get lost, right? You can, on these mega facilities, especially when you deal with could be contracts into the several hundred million, or even towards over $500 million. Some of these larger contracts in some of these semiconductor builds. So you got a lot of parts and pieces, so there's a lot to it. The industry's fast moving right now, so you don't have a lot of time like you think you should have. So there's a lot of work to it. But I was just mostly oversight, than anything else. I'm the old guy in the room, so I'm risk based, so I'm really good at catching the things that I think are going to be troublesome. Good at raising my hand and say, hey, what about? Hey, what if? How about this? How about that? Sort of thing. So, it's been good. I'm fortunate because, I broke into the industry and the trades, so I was hands-on in the beginning, and broke into big work, early, and just loved it, and just been a hungry student for construction, since I was 18 years old. Been going at it now for almost 50 years, but I love it. Love what I do.
Well, I appreciate you correcting me right off the bat there on.
Well, this just happened, Yeah, this just recently happened. We probably should discuss.
We'll go up from here, Dana.
Yeah.
So how did you? I know you touched on it briefly, but why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you first get involved in construction and the pre-construction management, and what do you see as what you're looking to do, in the interim and next?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, easy lead into construction. A third generation union iron worker. My grandfather was a union iron worker. My dad was a union iron worker. obviously I became a union iron worker. My son today is actually a fourth generation union iron worker. He's business manager for the union in Connecticut. So we were big fish in a little pond, coming out of Connecticut. Our family had been, pretty much legacy family. So we're a pretty big name, not a big membership. And the family had a really good reputation. What we did, we were good at what we did, and, prided ourselves in our name and in our trade. So, to me, coming in, first thing my dad told me is don't fuck up my name. It's not yours, it's mine. So I had that going in, right? So, I just didn't want to screw up the family name, right? So, I worked hard and I put my head down, and I had just decided that I wanted to be the best iron worker that there ever was, right? And so I worked real hard at it. By the time I was 25, I was superintendent with over 250 people working for me. But right about then is when I started to see that I had pretty much reached my nirvana in the union. I didn't have any political aspirations like my son does. Pretty much knew that, I had capped out, and this was, in the 80s. And if you didn't have a college education, you weren't going to get much further forward, especially as an iron worker. We were kind of a blind trade to a lot of general contractors for for taking supervisory roles. They were more looking for carpenters because, carpenters had a little bit more skill sets for, in general construction than iron workers did. So at 28, decided to go back to college, pulled all my money out of the bank, and went back to school for engineering. And then I stayed in the business, which is an interesting thing because my wife at the time was going to med school. And I think my last year in the iron workers, this was in the 80s, I worked a lot of hours that year, did a lot of overtime, and I had made really good money. I made just about 90 grand that year, and I went back to college and spent a couple of years of school. And my very first job coming out of college as an engineer, I made $27,000. My wife was just aghast at what I had done. How could you do that? And I know early on that I had to go backwards to go forward, right? So I took a job as a design engineer for a truss company, a little place in Kentucky, and enjoyed it for a bit, and then got bored with it, honestly, because I wasn't out in the field. I wasn't there with the dust and the cranes and the trucks and the men. And so I just decided I just wasn't really set up to be that kind of, wasn't where I wanted to go. So I got back into steel and got into project management and estimating. Was an estimator first, and then took on project management roles, and obviously then just took on bigger and bigger and bigger jobs. And my career has been one of which I have chased projects. I don't chase companies. I don't chase organizations so much. I chase challenges, and that's been my bailiwick all the way through it. Which it has caused me some hard times during interviews at times when people look at your resume and go, hey, you don't have very many long stays anywhere. How come you're a lot of 2 years here, 3 years here, and I'm like, I'm a project guy. I go to a project, I finish the job. If you don't have another one that's challenging or interesting to me, I'm sorry, I'm going to move on to something else. That's just who I am, and, probably who I'm going to be forever. I don't ever plan on retiring, as long as I'm physically fit and mentally fit. My wife says I just get in her way anyway. She's been retired for like 5 years. So, and I love what I do. I love high pressure, high velocity projects with a lot of parts and pieces moving. I love teaching. I consider myself to be a mentor. I love taking young people and getting the most out of them, and 'cause right now, honestly, we're talking about this. I think young people, honestly, today are getting a real shitty rap in a lot of ways. They just are. You know what I mean? It's real easy for the older generation to say, what do they know? Entitlement, 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 entitlement. Well, it's been my experience, truthfully, that young people that I interact with in my industry, they're hungry. They want to learn and they want to be involved. They do. And, if I could find people like that, those are the people that I'm attracted to, right? I will give them everything I got. Anything that's in this can you can have, and it's been wonderful, it really has, because to take young men and young women and, you put them in some of these environments that are just pressure cookers, just complete pressure cookers. The workload only increases, from what I do, usually is all I do is increase people's loads. And when I'm walking up to you, if you finish something, I'm looking to give you something, something new, right? So, but it's interesting because what I have found is people want challenges. They want to succeed at those challenges. They want to feel valued. They want to, they want to feel important. So, it's a matter of trust, right? You got to get your team to trust you. You got to build some kind of a bond with them. And, psychologically, you've got to be there for them. Like, people need to understand you don't have to be right all the time. It's okay to make a mistake. It just, those happen, right? But, in our business, things move so damn fast that a lot of times I have to make decisions, or leaders like myself are making decisions with not a lot of information and not a lot of time, right? So you're asking your team to do things and move with things that they're not quite understanding or not quite getting, or maybe even agreeing with, because they don't quite see the whole picture. Some of the times they don't need to see the whole picture because it's really kind of out of their role. But other times, they really should see, the reason why you're making that move, because, there's certainly reasons why we do the things we do when we have the experience that we do, right? I got to make calculated decisions on limited data sometimes, so
Yeah.
but it's been a great ride, man. It really has, Jacob. Really
It's
has.
quite the journey. It's
Yeah,
funny.
it has, it really has.
You mentioned, people looking at your resume and saying 2 years here and 3 years there.
Yeah.
Like, I've been
Yeah.
in corporate America, corporate sales more specifically, for, the better part of a decade and a half. And I am the same way. My resume reads 1 year here, 10 months there, 2 years here, 7 months there. And it isn't because of a lack of, wanting that to be the best fit. It's because I realized after a while that it wasn't the best fit. And if I was going to continue to grow as a person, as, a professional, as a salesperson, then I needed to find a different avenue. And I think that, it's frowned upon in some people's, eyes, but at the end of the day, like, I'm not looking for other people's, judgment or approval on my decisions for my life. It's the right move for me. It's the right move for me. And that's not anyone else's to judge,
Oh, yeah. I completely agree with you there. There's, listen, I have been quite successful in my career. Could I have taken different turns here and there that maybe have been a little bit more comfortable for myself? Yeah, sure. Absolutely. But every job, every project, every company, I have learned and taken something away from, and I've learned something new. That's kind of my mantra is, if you don't learn something new every day, you haven't paid attention to what's going on around you today. So, and I pride myself in that. I'm a student of life. I still am. I'm taking a LinkedIn class now on data analytics. I'm constantly trying to improve my skill sets. Even at 67 years old. One is I'm up working with the smartest, brightest people in the world, depending, in all disciplines. I'm a structural engineer, iron worker, and I'm dealing more with mechanical and electrical systems than anything else. I mean, for instance, I showed up on this $15 billion semiconductor build here in Boise, and you would have thought that with my resume and my history that I'd have been in charge of the structural steel, the trestles, something like that, which there was billions of dollars worth of work there. But no, they put me in charge of $3.4 billion worth of electrical work. So, what do you do besides you grab it and you roll, right? Fortunately for me, I had a great team, people that were very bright, and knew that I, wasn't as bright in that particular discipline, but had no problem working for me, right? It's just, all I asked them to do was just give me enough so I could go into a room and not look stupid. That's all. And they did it, so. They do all the work behind the scenes. A lot of times people in my position, we're the face, you know what I mean? We're the face, we're, we move parts, we move pieces, we look forward, but, we're not the heavy lifters, we're not, the people behind me, people that very rarely ever get any kind of recognition outside of from me or, people around me, do all the work. They really do. They really do.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I know, you and I talked briefly. I know you're going to Austin next week for a pre-construction summit.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong. It's about things like cost control, risk strategy?
Yeah. This is a pre-construction conference for mega facilities. So there'll be all different kinds of contractors and speakers there on different subjects. But my keynote is on cost control strategies and large-scale project management, and for me, there's three basic functions in that setup, and one is, integrated budget forecasting, and the second is risk-based cost contingency planning, and lastly, it's continuous performance monitoring and cost control and watching the controls, right? So those three basic pillars are the key for all of it. Now, it sounds simple, but there's a shit ton to it, man. And you got to get in there early. And the problem with what goes on in the industry today is leaders aren't making decisions fast enough, man. They're sitting on their hands. They're letting stuff fester, figuring shit's going to work its way out eventually. It'll get fixed in construction. It'll get fixed down the road, get fixed this way, and it just doesn't happen. And, I'm a firm believer, and I think part of my big success has been my ability to communicate through tough times, right? I'm not afraid to tell the client when there's a problem. That's my job, right? My job is to communicate, good or bad. And good communication typically travels real fast, right? Bad communication typically travels faster once it's hit, but it takes a lot longer to hit than good information does, right? So people sit on bad information, but once it hits, it goes, and it'll escalate to levels that are just, ridiculous. But, when something's, that there's a problem, the problem's got to be identified, and it has to be, a plan of action's got to be put in place, right? I mean, that's how we solve things in our business, and especially in semiconductors, because tool sets are changing so fast. What a semiconductor fab may have been planning to build for main chips, in design and actually into, well into design and maybe into construction starting. Guess what? The market changes. Next thing you know, there's a different tool set that has to come out, and you're looking at, different whole set of facility matrices to, feed the tool sets and all, for instance, I've seen them go for where you on initial design, you're like on tool matrix number 3, for utilities to feed it. And then next thing you know, a year later, you're on number 11 or 12. And you're still designing as you're building. So very difficult, very difficult. You've got a lot of problems. It's tough business, it really is.
Yeah, it sounds like it, man. Well, I'm looking forward to, you having the ability to do that keynote down there, though. I think that'll be.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because, like I said earlier, I kind of pride myself being able to see forward. I can see the forest, through the trees. I just can, just because of my time. You develop a sense of flow, a sense of communication, and just a sense of reality of where the project may sit, right? And you can't fix things fast enough in the field, so they got to get it right on the front side. That's the whole thing, right? That's our whole deal. One is rework is extremely expensive and costly for time, and nobody plans to spend that kind of money ever. No matter what kind of contingency you have built into place, it's very small percentage for rework, because who goes into a project ever figuring that you're going to do something wrong?
Yeah, now you make a lot of sense.
We don't build shit for practice. I mean, if you're building stuff for practice in our game, I mean, you're not going to be around very long.
No, you're not. One theme that a lot of leaders wrestle with today, obviously, is how the role that technology and increasingly AI is fitting into their work. So I am curious. I mean, obviously, you recently transitioned out from Sprint Mechanical, but just in general, I mean, what role does technology or AI, play in the pre-construction process?
Well, it can play a huge role for the people who are up in the game right now. It's not our enemy, okay? AI isn't going to replace leaders. What it's going to do is spotlight the leaders who aren't making actions fast enough in the industry, okay? What people falsely, I think, lean towards with AI not being good or useful is they go, oh, where's the data coming from? Okay. Well, you put the data in. I mean, how I use AI is I supply the data, right? And then I have AI run whatever I ask it to do. You know what I mean? Whatever analyticals I need, how I want it to separate it, how I want it to club it, how I want it to group it, whatever it may be. And, you can do, I mean, there are so many different softwares out there right now in construction, that you can run analyticals on and theoreticals on and worst case scenarios on and, all different kinds of things. You've got software now that you can actually take a blueprint and it will do a takeoff for you.
Yeah.
Now, granted, you got to do a check on that, okay? But what you have taken on a massive drawing may be what may have taken a single person hours to look at a sheet, right? The AI can take that sheet, it can give you a takeoff on it, and then also give you a written summary on what's going on in the drawing. So it may not always be perfect, and I don't expect it to be perfect, and you shouldn't use it in the sense to be perfect. But just imagine the head start you can get with that sort of information, right? And as these systems start to teach themselves, because they learn, these systems are only going to get better and better and better. And those companies that are shying away from integrating AI are going to get left behind quickly, very quickly. It's not cheating, all right? It's not doing your thinking for you, okay? It's speeding up what you can't do manually, right? Now, for instance, I can take a simple spreadsheet that is massive to me and put that thing in and ask it to run a couple of functions for me to just extrapolate 3 or 4 different big items I'm looking for that would take me hours, messing around with Excel. And in a matter of minutes, it spits it out. Now, of course, you got to do a check on it, but, that's why we have different departments, but from where I lay in, you know what I mean? I run it and then I'll run it off and I'll give it to the accountant and say, what does this look like to you? Is this right? Scenarios, but I would be very, very hard pressed to, use it as a hard opinion that I would want to run with yet. And most certainly, I don't believe that it's in a place where it should be used for psychological. People are using it for shrinks right now too.
Yeah, they
A
are.
little bit crazy.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is like, where do you feel, I mean, for construction technology, where do you still see limitations on?
Well, the limitations are on the information that's available, right? So, you can feed the machine anything, but if you're not feeding it complete information, it's going to have to make assumptions of some sort, right? Or you're going to leave the assumptions to yourself, right? So that's where I think the gaps are right now. It used to be a time, Jacob, when I broke into the business way back when you were handed a set of drawings, you built the job. Changed, very rarely. That's it. It was ready to go. Well, today, you may be getting handed drawings that are well far from 100%. Now, what I mean? In theory, you should be building off of stuff that's, approved for construction, but designs move so fast and, integration and, cohesion and, BIM information modeling at sometimes isn't what it really needs to be. So there could be a ton of stuff missing, and, now especially with off-site manufacturing where they're taking these large projects and taking chunks of these, certain parts of the facilities and building them off-site and bringing them in and kind of building them like erector sets, like a Lego set. Even then it creates even bigger problems, so there's a lot of work to it. The big problem we have is still too many companies are operating in silos, departmentally, some of them are just completely archaic in how they run their,
anarchic.
Anarchic. Yeah, exactly. They just ain't, they're just not really keeping up with, technology and how it is. And of course, then there's layers of arrogance out there as well too, with people just figure that their way is the only way, so
yeah.
I built a lot of jobs, a lot of projects, and every one of them has a unique challenge to it. Every single one of them, it does, but problems identified early are problems solved early.
Yep. I think you make a lot of great points there. I think I don't think that it's just going to replace leadership roles just inherently just because of what it does. But to your point, it's going to surface the ones who are being the most productive and taking the most action and who are getting the most results. So, it's going to weed out the lesser of some of these roles. I think first and foremost, I think the part about people being siloed is a huge possibility of a place where this could go and really be working in a very positive direction is once you can figure out a way to unsilo those different areas and you can communicate well and things can be fed into one team to another team, and this is your job and everything. I think things will become a lot more, a lot more transparent as to like what is your specific role and what is it that you're supposed to be helping with, and you do that piece. So it's I think going to help people to wear less hats in some capacity, because it's going to help them to be able to. Somebody's going to have to do one thing full time to be able to let somebody else who does something better in that regard do it full time. So there's still a long way to go, though.
No, agreed. And I think, we're still at a high level of distrust by the general public, right? They're scared shit. They're scared shitless of it. Okay. I don't want to, and especially for a whole lot of people that are, for lack of better words, maybe lower skilled, not quite as educated enough. They're fearful that somehow a machine is going to replace them. Well, in manufacturing, machinery is obviously, technology has changed quite a bit, right? And there's automation, in the steel industry now. That's robotics and all kinds of things that are new wave has just moved in like in the last 2 decades. So shop hands are reduced in that sort of a capacity. However, there's other jobs that are being created as a result of that too. So I don't think human race is going to lose everything to machines. And most certainly the thinking part about it is we don't want AI to do our thinking. What we want AI to do is enhance our thinking. Okay. To give you another avenue of a thought, right? Maybe take you to a direction you ain't quite there yet. Maybe it'll give you 5 options of thought process you aren't really thinking about. It may have taken you a whole day to ponder on something where the AI could spit something out in a matter of 2 minutes, man. And you just look at it. I mean, we're not kids in high school copying and pasting, making reports in. This is not what we do. Okay, so there's not a cheat aspect to this. Right, it's a matter of just using the technology, for all the best cases that you can, whatever avenue it is, whatever lane you need to take it down. I mean, the machine's going to fit through many doors, right? You just got to be a matter of grabbing it and using it, right? You have to use it though, you got to use it. And I have been using it quite a bit for the last couple of years, and now especially with, like I said, I'm taking this class in LinkedIn for data analytics, and all that's going to be AI driven, right? I mean, what I want to do is I want to get sharper at trying to figure out how to produce more in-depth reports, quickly, because what I talk about in pre-construction is I don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of time, and if we can figure out ways to feed in the information, and ask the right questions, and, it should be able to continue to learn and help us learn. So, I'm not afraid of it. And,
I love it.
I don't think any of us should be afraid of it, and this is another thing, this is where I like to shoulder up against the young ones. Because they've been, well, they're not afraid of it, right? They're just not, and what you have to be careful about, though, and I will say this, and I'm a huge adamant proponent, and I will beat this drum hard to everybody that works around me, is proprietary information. You don't use it in AI. You just don't. Because you don't know where it is, right?
That's
I don't
sure.
give a shit where the numbers go, right? I mean, as long as they don't know what the numbers are about, who cares, right? But if you start mentioning, projects, clients, companies, people, God only knows where the heck that shit goes. So, so there is there is a stewardship of it, But most companies now are bringing in their own AI software into the company and having you use that particular AI platform if you're going to use it at work, So,
yeah,
which is smart.
Yeah, it is. You're almost pre-vetting,
Well, yeah, listen, you got people just don't know. A lot of times you're going to get somebody who's going to copy and paste a whole document, maybe, right, and not filter it, and just throw it into Chat GPT or Grammarly or whatever they're in, right, and say, do whatever. And next thing you know, yeah, it's done this wonderful thing, but I don't know where that information gets stored.
Yeah. No, you make a lot of good points, Dana. I'm curious, before we wrap,
Yeah.
before we go,
Yeah.
where can listeners learn more about your work or connect with you? And secondly,
Oh, yeah.
is there anything about pre-construction, leadership, tech, anything that you'd want to emphasize to our audience? So kind of a twofold question.
Yeah, well, number one, I would emphasize to anybody who is in construction industry or any kind of the tech industry is to continue to learn. Right, I got it right here up in front of me, so I had to post it that it's right here. I keep in front of me all the time. I'm 67 freaking years old. It says, "Learn everything and don't stop." So, learn everything and don't stop is my advice. It doesn't matter what it is. Just be a sieve for information. I didn't get to manage, over $3 billion worth of electrical work just by having people around me be good at it. I had to learn. You know what I mean? I had to learn. I had to learn the basics. I had to learn stuff of it. You know what I mean? I had to learn enough so I kind of knew what I was talking about. And then I could defer at least to somebody else. But for what I got going on right now, I just started my own firm, EPC Consultants LLC, based out of Boise. People can find that, probably it'll be up on LinkedIn. I'll get it posted up here. But easiest way to follow what I do is I'm really active on LinkedIn. Just look for Dana Wells on LinkedIn.
I agree.
And yeah, no, I'm probably as active as anybody is, and I will continue to be, because if I can reach just one person, one young person, and make a difference in their life and get them to just want to, do better and find a way to improve and to continue to grow. Because, as a young iron worker, all I ever wanted to do, was just to be a good iron worker, right? And then shortly then, you find yourself wanting to be a superintendent, and then wanting to be a project manager, and then want to be an operations manager, and then the next thing you know, you find yourself in a career much like mine, and you wore a lot of hats, and you've been all over the country, and you met all these wonderful people, and built some amazing projects that that will stand as for several generations, anyways. You know what I mean? So, my legacy will be in the buildings I leave and the people that I leave behind. That'll be my legacy, hopefully.
Well, I love it, Dana. I really appreciate the time. If anybody out here wants to find Dana, like he said, find him on LinkedIn. He's connected with me, so, probably pretty easy to find out there, but really love the insights, Dana.
I appreciate the time. Thanks you.
And, you've garnered the knowledge over the years of, working smarter, not harder,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's something that's I think going to be really valuable to our audience to hear your perspective on this. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you.
And good luck next week at the keynote.
Thank you, man. We'll talk soon. Appreciate you.